Thank you for viewing this forum. My name is Kimberley Crockett, and I am the Political Action Chair of the Eastern Panhandle Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And together with the membership of the League of Women Voters of Jefferson County, we are pleased to offer this debate forum for your consideration. In this era of COVID-19, we are bringing you this debate forum via Zoom in an effort to educate the larger community about the 2020 general elections and several local offices that have contested races, while maintaining an appropriate social distance. Therefore, the EPAC chapter of Delta Sigma Theta and the League of Women Voters thank all the candidates who have participated in this year's virtual debate forums. We're very pleased to present the candidates for the West Virginia House of Delegates District 66, Paul Espinosa and Storme Shiley Frame. Candidates, we will begin this forum by offering each of you 1 minute to introduce yourself to the viewers. We will then ask each of you questions submitted by our organization's membership, allowing 2 minutes for your responses. Finally, we will close with a 2-minute wrap-up where each of you will offer any additional information for consideration. Let's begin our forum. Mr. Espinosa, you have 1 minute to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Ms. Crockett, and good afternoon. I'm Delegate Paul Espinosa, and I'd like to begin by thanking the League of Women Voters of Jefferson County for hosting this afternoon's candidate forum. I've been honored to represent the 66th District in the West Virginia House of Delegates since my election in 2012. Where I've been an advocate for economic growth, first-rate schools, government accountability and transparency, and controlling government spending. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this afternoon's forum, and I look forward to a productive dialogue.
Thank you, Mr. Espinosa. Ms. Frame, you also have 1 minute to introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Storme Shiley Frame, and I'm running in the House of Delegates in the 66th District. I'd like to thank this forum for hosting this forum today. And I will advocate as a representative of this 66th District for public education, for economic development, for sustainable agriculture. And I look forward to representing the people of this district and being their voice in our House. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. We will begin with our first question. Ms. Frame, what is your legislative plan for the 66th District of the House of Delegates should you be elected?
So thank you for the question. My plan for the 66th District is multifaceted. First, as a teacher in the district, I find that it's really important for us to focus on public education and supporting the educators and service personnel in our district. Second, economic growth. We need to support responsible businesses in the district and bring in and support more small businesses. And then finally, sustainable agriculture and conserving our natural resources. We have an incredibly beautiful rural district in the 66th, and we should keep it that way.
Thank you, Ms. Frame. Mr. Espinosa, what is your legislative plan for the 66th District of the House of Delegates should you be reelected?
Well, thank you for that question, Ms. Crockett. I think in wake of the pandemic, a good bit of our focus in the coming legislative session will be on enacting legislation that will help us continue our economic recovery. You know, as I've traveled the 66th District, talked with constituents, certainly they have a lot of concerns in the wake of the pandemic. A number of individuals have been impacted by loss of jobs. We had one of our major employers in Jefferson County announce the layoff of more than 500 workers. That comes on the heel of another manufacturer that laid off more than 100 workers. And so with some of the economic disruptions as a result of the pandemic, particularly in our tourism sector, you know, a lot of folks are hurting. And so, you know, I will certainly work with my legislative colleagues to continue to enact legislation to address the impediments to job creation that for too long have caused West Virginia to lag behind much of the rest of the country. Certainly, we'll work to enact policies that will ensure that our students can remain in school in a safe environment, continuing to reduce barriers to entry in the workforce. Too often we hear that it's very difficult for individuals to get into certain professions because of burdensome regulations that do little to help ensure qualifications for those jobs. As a result of the state of emergency that the governor has declared, he has issued a number of executive orders that have relaxed certain regulations in telehealth, for example. I look for us to look very closely at some of those freedoms that the governor has provided during the pandemic and enact permanent legislation so that individuals, businesses, and so forth will be able to enjoy some of the freedoms that we've had as a result of those executive orders. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Espinosa. The second question, as I'm sure you are aware, numerous states have introduced and passed bills banning hair discrimination through the Crown Act, an acronym for Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair. West Virginia Senate Bill 850, a bill to ban hair discrimination in West Virginia schools and workplaces, was defeated this year. If elected, will you introduce or support a bill that would make it illegal to discriminate against a person for their hair texture and style? And if so, or if not, why?
Well, Ms. Crockett, again, I appreciate the question. Let me say at the outset that I certainly, oppose, discrimination on any level. I certainly don't believe that individuals should be discriminated against, particularly those students who are attempting to participate in extracurricular activities. With regard to Senate Bill 850, that particular legislation was not a piece of legislation that came through any of the committees on which I currently serve. I do serve on the House Committee on Finance as well as the House Committee on Education. I do recall late in the session that there was an attempt to discharge that bill from committee, but for whatever reason, that bill apparently did not have sufficient support in order to make it out of that committee. I will certainly pledge that I will become familiar with that piece of legislation and again, will give it serious consideration. I will say that as I travel around the 66th district and I ask what's on my constituents' minds, that's not an issue that has been raised by anybody that I've spoken with, and certainly recognize that all legislation is of interest to someone, and certainly respect that those that have sponsored this bill are trying to oppose discrimination, which I certainly support. But I can't say that it's been a priority bill that anyone has asked about, and therefore it's just not a piece of legislation I'm familiar with.
Thank you. Ms. Frame, as I'm sure you're aware, numerous states have introduced and passed bills banning hair discrimination through the Crown Act, an acronym for Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair. West Virginia Senate Bill 850, a bill to ban hair discrimination in West Virginia schools and workplaces, was defeated last year. If elected, will you introduce or support a bill that would make it illegal to discriminate against a person for their hair texture or style? If so, why? If not, also why?
The answer to that question should be yes, a resounding yes. Why wouldn't we support a bill that is anti-discrimination? And I, it's meaningful and important to me. I'm married to a strong Black woman, and I really feel like that we need to do more. We have to do more. And so having blunt answers sometimes is what it needs to be. And so with this, yes, I would support it. I would stand with Danielle Walker and Sammy Brown and all of those that were fighting for anti-discrimination laws. And I'm not sure who my opponent has been talking to, but I know that I've talked to several people in the 66th district that this bill is of interest to them. And more importantly, all West Virginians, no matter who they are or who they plan to vote for, support anti-discrimination laws and should. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frame. Before we continue with our next question, I'll note that, Ms. Frame, your bandwidth is coming through as low, and for the recording, that could be difficult for the viewers to see later on. So we're going to go forward with our next question, but maybe if you wouldn't mind utilizing your picture instead of the live video stream, and we'll see if that improves our connection. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Our third question, and Ms. Frame, this question will go to you first. What is your position on increasing the minimum wage for hardworking people of West Virginia?
Well, okay, she just asked me to start my video. Do you want me to try to start it or leave it on picture? Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm muted.
It's okay.
Let's see if we can leave things the way they are and just try to keep some consistency going forward. So we'll give your picture a shot, and hopefully we'll be successful with this and we'll be able to complete the forum. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So as a union worker, as a teacher and an advocate, I was very fortunate to charter and become the president of the Jefferson County AFT Union, the American Federation of Teachers Union. So stronger minimum wage is absolutely at the forefront of all of our minds. However, it's not lost on me that we are in a pandemic and that these things take time, especially in a state such as West Virginia, where our wages are below the average across the board. I mean, as an educator, we rank in the 48th percentile. So it is not, I think that it should absolutely be a goal. And I support the unions and, you know, would support legislation coming forward to bring us to that goal. But it's not lost on me of where we are and the difficulties that we have in our state.
Thank you, Ms. Frame. Mr. Espinosa, the same question. What is your position on increasing the minimum wage for hardworking people in West Virginia?
Well, thank you, Ms. Crockett. I did support legislation, not during the current legislative session. I think it was during the previous one, to increase our minimum wage. However, I do have concerns about some of the unintended consequences, not only in West Virginia, but I think you've seen around the country in some cases, employers in response to some of the minimum wages that have been enacted have opted for workforce reductions. And as a result, you know, some of the individuals that I think a minimum wage is really intended to assist, namely those unskilled workers, those that are just entering the workforce, sometimes end up, without opportunities for gainful employment. So, I think really the best way to ensure that we have good wages is to attract quality job creators to West Virginia. And I'm pleased that we're seeing that here in the Eastern Panhandle, with Macy's setting up operations here in the Eastern Panhandle, now Procter & Gamble, Quad Graphic. We have obviously a new employer in Jefferson County, the Hollywood Casino. With that competition for quality workforce comes increased wages. You look at Procter & Gamble, I think they are offering wages in excess of $18, and all of the other major employers in the Eastern Panhandle are required to follow suit. So that's the approach that I think is best to take, is to, again, develop a business climate that attracts quality job creators so that they have to compete for employees, and that will result in increased wages without some of the unintended consequences, particularly on those individuals that are just entering the workforce that don't have the skills to compete for some of those higher wages.
Thank you, Mr. Espinosa. We'll move to our next question. Would you support, and this is Mr. Espinosa, you will actually take this question first.
Okay, thank you.
Would you support legislation to improve the quality of community policing? For example, mandating minimum continuing education training on implicit bias and diversity, and increasing and implementing intermittent training on use of force?
Sure. Well, I think first I will say that, as we look at some of the incidents that have happened around the country, I think I certainly join, everyone in condemning those type of actions. I mean, certainly I'm a big supporter of our police forces, and I think we're very fortunate, here, particularly in Jefferson County, to have quality both county and municipal police forces, but certainly would support efforts to make sure that our police officers and deputies have the training that they need in order to make sure that they are not, engaging in some of the types of activities from around the, that we've seen, in some of our metropolitan areas around the country. As far as specific legislation, I would really need to see exactly what does that legislation call for. I think very often, we're asked as legislators whether we will support a concept, and while again, I certainly support, the concept of making sure that our police officers, deputies, and troopers have sufficient training. You really need to see the specifics of what that legislation entails. I'd also really want to talk with our law enforcement community to get a better understanding of what are some of the things they think they can do to make sure that those individuals that engage in improper behavior are held accountable, and also to make sure that police officers have the training they need to de-escalate situations so that they don't devolve into some of the very dismaying scenes that we've seen around the country.
Thank you. Ms. Frame, would you support legislation to improve the quality of community policing? For example, mandating minimum continuing education training or implicit bias and diversity training, and increasing and implementing intermittent training on use of force?
Thank you for this question. The reason you don't see my video today is because we were at the joint Jefferson County, Berkeley County NAACP event at Morgan's Grove Park. We participated in the caravan this morning on racial inequality, and it should be on the forefront of all of our minds, especially throughout the events that are happening in our nation. Yes, I would support a mandated minimum CE. As a teacher, I have to complete continuing education on specific topics sometimes. Sometimes there are specific topics that we are to focus on. I think that implicit bias and diversity are absolutely need to be focused and on continuing education. And so yes, I would support legislation. As a delegate in the House, I would work very closely, or I would want to work very closely with the NAACP and variety of lobbyists and union lobbyists to make sure that we are representing the people of our district and what they feel they need to be supported in this environment. And if that's what it is, then that's what we should be focused on. And I will agree with Espinosa on the point that we are very fortunate in Jefferson County. There are some incredible law enforcement officers in Jefferson County specifically, and we are very grateful for them. They have joined with us, and they are supporting us and advocating, and I think that that is a tremendous step. But legislation will see that step through. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frame. And Ms. Frame, you will take the next question. How important do you believe public libraries are to the citizens of West Virginia? And if you believe they are important, how do you intend to see that they thrive in the future?
In Jefferson as a teacher, my home school in Jefferson County is Harpers Ferry Middle School. And when we're not in a pandemic year, we're able to work directly with the Harpers Ferry Library, public library, which supports our students. And I think it's an incredibly important asset. The libraries have worked really hard. Our local libraries have worked really hard to push the standards, and so that they are keeping up with where we are in our curriculum, et cetera, as a county and as a state. And so, yes, I feel like we should be using that as a resource. Our students should have a place to go, and we should be investing in our public libraries.
Thank you. Mr. Espinosa, how important do you believe public libraries are to the citizens of West Virginia? And if you believe they are important, how do you intend to see that they thrive in the future?
Well, thank you for the question. I'm a big supporter of our libraries, and that really goes back to the days when our three children who benefited from our local community libraries, particularly here in the southern part of the county, South Jefferson Public Library, would go to story hour. I did have an opportunity, at least for our son, when he was a toddler, kind of a preschooler, escorting him, accompanying him to story hour. So certainly was able to see the benefits firsthand that our public libraries have. As a member of the legislature and as a member of the House Finance Committee, I've been a strong supporter of our public libraries, have regularly met with our library staff as they've made that 5-hour trip to Charleston to meet with us, and always take time to meet with them and to understand, some of the issues that they are having, not only with funding, but also ensuring that they have adequate broadband in order to not only operate, but to make available for their constituents. And I would also say personally, I've benefited from our libraries through audio books. I've been very pleased to take advantage of some of the audio book opportunities that are available not only from our local libraries here in Jefferson County, but from our state library. And it certainly makes the 5-hour drive to Charleston much more manageable when you can listen to a good book, a good biography. So very much support our libraries, and will continue to do everything that I can as a member of our House Finance Committee to ensure that they do have the funding they need to provide this valuable service, not only for the community, but for our schools as well.
Thank you, Mr. Espinosa. Our next question, you will take that first also. Lack of access to sanitary and feminine hygiene products can be a barrier to school and workforce attendance. If elected to the House of Delegates or re-elected to the House of Delegates, would you support a state tax exemption on these products?
Well, certainly recognize that that's an important need, particularly for those individuals that may not have the means to purchase those products on their own. I do recall legislation being considered that would have allowed, that would have provided those feminine hygiene products to our schools. Certainly recognize that many of our teachers, school service personnel, and administrators make those products available. As far as an actual tax exemption, again, certainly would be open to the concept. I would have to know what the specifics are, what the investment that would need in order to provide that. My preference typically is to address issues through tax policy as opposed to exemptions. I think sometimes when we implement exemptions, it really makes our tax code much more complicated for folks to comply with. So I'd also want to look at the tax side of it up front. Perhaps we could avoid taxing a particular item as opposed to taxing an individual and requiring them to file for an exemption. So certainly would be open to the subject. We'll just have to know a little bit more about it and understand what the fiscal implications would be.
Thank you. Ms. Ream, also, lack of access to sanitary and feminine hygiene products can be a barrier to school and workforce attendance. If elected to the House of Delegates, would you support a state tax exemption on these products?
Yes, I would. Again, as an educator, I see firsthand the lack of resources that some of our students have. I think the legislation that was introduced last year should have gone through with no problem. And it's legislators who use the terminology that they'll be open to the subject if they learn more, that's keep holding our state back and making it so that we don't have the opportunities that we could have, and we're not supporting our citizens the way that we should. I think that we absolutely should be looking at this, at the tax, if not, completely diminishing it or getting rid of it, at least not making it tax exempt, at least a reduction as a start. Absolutely. And I think that we should be supporting the legislation that would provide it to our students in our schools. We shouldn't have children who choose not to come to school because they're having issues and don't have the resources or money to fund that.
Thank you, Ms. Frame. In light, I'm sorry, Ms. Frame, this next question will be yours first. In light of the needs brought on by COVID-19, what is your plan to address the repercussions of the pandemic on your district via allocating funding or other services that will impact areas such as physical or behavioral health, domestic abuse, election security, feeding school-age kids in need, assisting first responders and those needing childcare who have returned to work?
Sorry, seeing it. Okay, so this obviously is not something that we've ever had to do before. And I'm not in the legislature right now, but I am very disappointed with our governor for not bringing in our legislators to help West Virginia through this state of emergency, because some of these decisions could have been dealt with and could have been handled with the federal money coming from the federal government at this time. And instead, I know that, under executive order, Governor Justice could spend the money, but I'm disappointed that we didn't have the opportunity for the legislation to determine what their specific districts needed. For this upcoming legislative session, it's going to be extremely important that we focus on families, that we focus on working families, and that we get people what they need in order to get our economy back into functioning. I will say I've been out in this specific 66 district is very rural, and there's a lot of farmers, and they actually had a little bit of an increase this summer in their supplies, I guess because people were home. And so they've seen an uptick of the amount of people purchasing from goods from them. So that's a good thing. But overall, I absolutely feel like it's going to take work. It's going to take long days of putting the people first in order to recover from this pandemic. And I will give another shout out to Jefferson County Schools this summer for feeding our children every week. I was able to participate with my children. We were able to give out books in coordination during the Tuesdays that they were giving out food. We were able to give out books, which was a highlight of my summer. And that program fed a lot of people. So we definitely need to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frame. Mr. Espinosa, in light of the needs brought on by COVID-19, what is your plan to address the repercussions of the pandemic on your district via perhaps allocating funding or other services that will impact areas such as physical and behavioral health, domestic abuse, election security, feeding school-age kids in need, assisting first responders, and those needing childcare who have returned to work?
Well, again, thank you for the question. Certainly, I believe during the upcoming legislative session, there's going to be an opportunity to continue to think about how we can use some of those dollars that we've received federally to address some of these challenges. I was very pleased to see that the governor has set aside a significant portion of the CARES Act funding to address broadband challenges. I think if anything that that's been reinforced as part of this pandemic, as each of us have become more familiar with some of the platforms like Zoom and GoToMeeting and so forth, is the need to have a good, reliable broadband. And so very pleased that the governor has set aside some dollars, and I would anticipate that the legislature will go beyond that. I was very pleased to hear that Senator Capito has continued her work on federal funding for broadband. It's estimated that West Virginia stands to receive several $100 million in funding aimed at addressing those individuals that don't have a quality broadband. So certainly I think that will continue to be a topic that we'll enact legislation for, building on several bills that we've enacted to allow municipalities to develop their own co-ops, incenting our utilities to invest in middle mile network in West Virginia, and also alleviating some of the regulatory hurdles that our wireless companies have to provide broadband, particularly out in rural areas. One of the things we've also seen is, as a result of some of the isolation associated with the pandemic, we have seen an uptick in the opioid pandemic. Certainly pleased to have enacted legislation to address that, a three-pronged approach really designed at education, strengthening penalties on some of the kingpin drug dealers, and also providing treatment. And I believe that's an area where we need to continue to work to provide assistance for those individuals.
Thank you, Mr. Espinosa. And thank you to both of the candidates. That concludes our question and answer portion of the forum. Now, each of you will take 2 minutes to offer any additional information for consideration by our viewers. Ms. Frame, you will go first.
Thank you. Can you see me? I'd like to end with my video on, if that's okay. Thank you so much, first of all, for the League of Women Voters for organizing this forum. Again, I am Storme Shiley Frame, and I'm running for the House of Delegates. I will advocate for high quality public education, for fully funded PEIA, for higher pay for our teachers and service personnel who are on the front lines currently during this pandemic, making sure that all of our children are learning. However, they're frustrated with our broadband access, as am I tonight at this forum. Our delegate has had 8 years to try to fix this problem and to work as a majority whip to make sure that we have broadband access in our rural district. I will get it done. I will work with companies to make sure that we have broadband, high quality, high speed broadband at all homes. Our infrastructure, speaking of broadband, we need to fix our roads. I live in a development where we swerve the potholes, and that's a problem. Economic development. I'm a realtor. In my spare time, I love real estate, and it's extremely important that we invite responsible businesses, that we support small businesses, and we're able to continue to improve our economic dispatch. And then finally, I believe in sustainable agriculture. We need to be responsible. We need to conserve our natural resources and work to work to make sure that we have a district that is supporting everyone and that it is a voice of the people. And I will not be balked. Thank you so much again for hosting this forum.
Thank you, Ms. Frame. Mr. Espinosa, you also have 2 minutes to offer any additional information for consideration by the viewers.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Can you hear me now? Good. Well, thank you again. And once again, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters of Jefferson County for hosting this afternoon's candidate forum. I do believe that Jefferson County needs a experienced, fiscally conservative voice who will continue to advocate for the issues that the 66 district cares about, including first-rate schools, controlling government spending, right-sizing our state government, and economic growth. I do remain confident that West Virginia can enjoy the prosperity much of the rest of the nation enjoys as we continue to become more competitive with our tax code, our regulatory climate, and our legal system. To my fellow residents of the 66th District, I respectfully ask for your vote, and I would welcome the opportunity to continue to serve you in the West Virginia House of Delegates. Thank you.
To our candidates, Ms. Frame and Mr. Espinosa, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today about your candidacy for delegate of the 66th District of the House of Delegates and the very important issues facing our community today. And to our viewers, just a reminder, the general election occurs on November 3rd. The last day you have to register to vote in the general election is October 13th. Early voting runs from October 21st through October 31st, including Saturdays. For those who are concerned about voting in person, in order to vote by absentee ballot, you have to apply for a ballot. Concerns for exposure to COVID-19 is a valid basis to request a ballot under the provision, other medical reasons, which keeps me confined. The last day to apply for an absentee ballot for the general election is October 28th of 2020. The application is available online through the Secretary of State's website. If you request an absentee ballot and then decide to vote in person, it's important that you please turn the ballot in at the polling site. Otherwise, your in-person ballot will be considered a provisional ballot until the county clerk verifies the absentee ballot has not been cast. Again, on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Jefferson County and the members of the Eastern Panhandle Alumnae Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, we would like to thank you for viewing this virtual debate forum. We have recorded debate forums for your additional contested local races in the 2020 general election, which are available on both of our Facebook pages, both the League of Women Voters and the EPAC chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Thank you again for viewing, and that concludes our debate.